Our second reading is from the letter to the Hebrews, and you heard Ruth mention during the announcements that the Presbyterian women are beginning a Bible study based on Hebrews this year. So I've decided to visit the book of Hebrews, the letter to the Hebrews, once a month in concurrence with the Bible study, just so that we can all immerse ourselves in it, because it's a great study. I will begin at chapter 1, verse 1. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by a Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created worlds. He is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being. And he sustains all things by his powerful word. When he had made purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In this week that was filled with news that horrified us and frightened us and made us weep for one another, there was at least one small, sweet item that I found. On Thursday morning, London time, the Duke of Cambridge, which is to say Prince William, took Prince George by the hand and led him to his first day of school. Reporters called the little prince adorably nervous in his navy blue uniform and matching backpack. And the article noted that the prince will be known as George Cambridge at school, and he'll be taking French and ballet this year among his other subjects. And all the children at the school, boys and girls, take ballet until they're 7. But Thursday was just a meeting day, meeting teachers, meeting classmates, becoming familiar with his classroom, just like millions of American school children. Why should we care? Wasn't there an American Revolution that sundered our relationship with the British monarchy? Well, yes, but now that we have taxation and representation on our own terms, we can enjoy royalty, much as we enjoy TV and books. And if the 20th anniversary of the death of George's beautiful and beloved grandmother, and that would be Princess Diana, imagine her as a grandmother, if that taught us anything, I'm pretty sure it was this: we're still fascinated. Young George Cambridge is the first son of a first son of a first son, all of whom, if things go according to plan, will eventually be made monarch over the United Kingdom. First sons have traditionally been given honored status since long before monarchies were around. The Bible is filled with stories of first sons being usurped by later-borns, which tells us that was actually very, very unusual. Normally it was the first son who would be entrusted to carry on the family name and the family work, and who would inherit most of the parents' wealth. When someone sent his first son as a representative, as Jesus has happen in parables sometimes, it's just as if the Father himself had shown up. It's an honor. And as you've heard today, Presbyterian women will be studying the letter to Hebrews this year. So since I will be visiting it, this seems like a great place to start at the very beginning, as the song goes. And as regards sons of honored status, the letter opens with these words. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us through a Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created worlds. This is a stunning theological claim. In earlier times, the prophets kept us up to date on God's thoughts, and we trusted them on that. Seemed legit. But now, more recently, God has spoken to us through a Son. And that Son is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being. The spitting image, you might say. It's just as if God came in the flesh. The letter to the Hebrews reminds us in its opening phrase what lies at the heart of our lives as Christians. God didn't send just anyone to us. God came. This is the heart of what draws us together. This is what gives us our unique identity. We are in community with Jesus Christ. The implications of this are enormous, especially where community is concerned. I've been reading about community this week, specifically about the ways in which contemporary American society contrasts with more tribal communities. The book is Tribe: On Homecoming and Belonging by Sebastian Junger. And if his name sounds familiar, he also wrote the books War and The Perfect Storm. This book has challenged my understanding of what it means to be in a real community and the gifts that can come from belonging to one. The author writes, human beings need 3 basic things in order to be content. They need to feel competent at what they do. They need to feel authentic in their lives. And they need to feel connected to others. I'm not sure anyone ever feels truly competent at being a Christian. I think that's the work of a lifetime for most of us. But belonging to the community of Jesus does give us some real opportunities to experience these things that can bring that kind of deep contentment. We can use our gifts to reach out and help one another. We can use our gifts to reach outside our doors to help those outside. We can feel a sense of authenticity as we come more and more deeply to be rooted in the gospel. And we can grow to feel deeply connected to those who share our concerns and our commitments. The author shows how people tend to move towards more tribe-like behaviors and feelings in the midst or in the aftermath of terrible events. War, attacks, natural disasters. This is because of how we respond. We pull together. Things like religion and race and sexual orientation fall away, and we become simply people with capabilities who instinctively use them to help one another. Catastrophes are also great levelers. One survivor wrote, "An earthquake achieves what the law promises, but does not in practice maintain the equality of all." True communities are egalitarian, and their power structures are fluid based on the specific gifts needed at different times. On September 11th, 2001, I was a seminary student in New York City, as many of you already know. Now, in normal times, New York is a place where millions of people have to get through the day without being overwhelmed by each other. So the way they normally do that is, for instance, to stride purposefully forward without making eye contact with anyone. Or they strive to maintain boundaries, maybe by reading a book of their personal space, even when packed into subway cars together. Or, and maybe most importantly, they do everything they can to ignore one another's weirdness. In the days and weeks after the 9/11 attacks, I noticed a palpable change in New York City. It was clear to me the first time I rode the one train after the subways had reopened. As we stood on the platforms waiting, I realized that we were all actually looking at one another. Some were even smiling tentatively at the people near them. It was as if everyone understood that we had all been through something horrible together, and that most likely we were looking at people who had experienced some loss, maybe a terrible loss. And as a result, a great tenderness had swept over the city, a sense of caring and kindness that had been absent before, because we all knew that we were in it, whatever it turned out to be, together. We were no longer strangers. We were bonded. For a time, we were one community. In this week of deadly hurricanes and earthquakes striking the U.S. and its neighbors, people are learning what it means to enter more deeply into community by caring for one another at times of disaster. And truly, things like religion and race and immigration status fall away at moments like that. Of the 70 or so people who died in Texas during Hurricane Harvey, at least one was a dreamer who was brought to the U.S. from Mexico while he was a minor. He traveled 120 miles from another part of the state to help in rescue efforts. And despite the legal limbo he would now be in if he were alive, he knew himself to be part of a larger community that he wanted to serve and to guard and to help. And so he put aside his own life, literally, and responded to the higher calling of the moment. No one has greater love than this, says Jesus. The letter to the Hebrews was written to communities that were going through times of trial and trouble, much like our nation and region today. But with Jesus as the foundation of their community and ours, we know that the only response, the only possible response to such trials is to come together, is to reach out to one another, to protect and defend one another, and to remember the loving sacrifice and service of the one who is the reflection of God's glory, the one who is the exact imprint of God's being, shows us what it means to be made in the image of God, and will always show us the way through and guide us home. Thanks be to God. Amen.